Hi everyone, hope you really enjoyed the Spider-Man Late for Work short film that I released last week. This video is going to be a visual effects breakdown of the film because pretty much everything in the film was visual effects. Going into this, I knew I didn't want to have to make many of the buildings in CG because I knew that I didn't want to have to make full environments for Spider-Man to be swinging through. So my idea was to go out with my camera and my drone and get some shots from the floor, some shots from the sky, and then I could 3D camera track them in Blender and then animate Spider-Man within that scene. So this is the Spider-Man model and rig. I didn't actually make the model myself or do the texturing, but I made the rig from scratch and I customized it for the animation that I was going to be doing. I have some hand controls which made it easier for animating the web shooting. I made some empties that I can rotate that are constrained to the x-axis, which allows me to bend the fingers and they'll only bend in the correct directions. I also took it a step further and added something called Corrective shape keys, which essentially is correcting for when the mesh kind of deforms and is stretched weirdly. So I have these kind of modifiers that change the shape of the mesh slightly, and they're controlled by the rotation of the bone. So as the bone rotates, it will kind of activate or deactivate the shape keys, which kind of counteracts the stretching. It's really cool. So this is the full CG shot that I did. This is the only full CG shot in the whole film. So I kind of have like two buildings, one on each side with some scaffolding and some fire escapes for detail. The way I did the Spider-Man animation for most of the shots is I added a curve, which is just a path, and then I added a follow path constraint to the rig. And then I can animate it across the course of the shot, and I can sort of choose the way in the direction I want Spider-Man to go. The buildings are literally just some photo facades that I found on textures.com that I extruded the details out of. And then for the windows, I just added a glossy material over the top of the texture so that they would reflect the HDRI, which kind of gave them a glassy feel, which worked really well. One of the details that I was quite proud of, but you probably couldn't even tell in the film, is I added a cloth simulation onto some of the stuff on the scaffolding, which gave it a bit of movement like it was blowing in the wind. In terms of the compositing for each shot, I kept it really simple, so I had a render of Spider-Man on his own and a render of the webs. The actual comp work was really basic, so I basically did some color correction to match Spider-Man into the scene, and then I added some light wrap, which just kind of helps him to bed into the background a bit better. And then I used the motion vectors that I put into the render to add some motion blur to Spider-Man as well. And now for the really big shot. So if you didn't actually notice, the entire end shot was CG, apart from a couple of green screen elements. So essentially I knew I wanted to get a shot on the tube, but I didn't really want to have to drag a couple of my friends onto the tube to help me film it. And I thought it would just be easier to do this in CG, so I thought I'd challenge myself. So I started off by modelling the interior of a London tube from a reference image, which I knew I didn't have to do too accurately because it was going to be quite out of focus in the background. Most of it was just made procedurally, and I painted a few hand textures like the texture on the seat. I added a wave texture to create some lines on the lights, and then I just unwrapped the boards and added a tube map to them. I made this fairly modular so that I could just duplicate the tube later on, so I modelled the seating area, and then I also modelled a different section with the doors, and then I just used an array modifier to make about 3 or 4 of those sections and push them back into space. Then in Nuke I used the depth pass to accurately create photoreal depth of field going back into the tube. To add some realism into the shot, I asked my flatmates if they would sit in front of the green screen and do some actions like playing on their phone, so that I could cut them out and place them on cards in 3D space inside the tube mesh that I created in Blender. And then last but not least, we needed the focal point of the shot, which was me with the Spider-Man mask in the back of my pocket. So I stood in front of the green screen again for this and just keyed myself out and placed myself in the foreground of the shot. I added a few finishing touches like adding some shadows onto the floor and the seats from where the guys were sitting. And then I also created a noise texture that I passed in a sideways motion and added some motion blur, and then mirrored it so that it was going in opposite directions on each side of the frame. And I put this in the windows just to create a sense of motion that the tube was actually moving. If you put all of those things together, you get a pretty convincing shot. I actually wasn't 100% happy with how this shot looks, but I finished it at 1 AM the night before I was releasing the video, and I really just wanted to sleep, so I kind of said this is good enough. As a VFX artist, I can spot a lot of the flaws, especially because I made it myself, but a couple of the people that I spoke to thought this was real, so I guess it's not as bad as I thought. So that is how I made the film. Maybe you knew how I did some of those things, and maybe they were a mystery until you watched this video. I'm planning on releasing some visual effects shorts every 2 weeks and also doing a breakdown of them as a new sort of format for this YouTube channel. We'll see how it goes, obviously. So if you enjoyed this, consider subscribing because there's going to be some new stuff coming more frequently from now on. Thank you for watching this video, and I'll see you very soon.